It is my privilege to join my first colloquy, to stand here on behalf of the Democratic Caucus, and it is a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for the small promotion, however brief. And I really do appreciate the insight into the week ahead, although it does seem to have a very local flavor to it. And I have to express my dismay that once again, the House Republican majority is putting forward an agenda designed to score points rather than address the very real challenges faced by Americans. Next week, President Biden will return to this chamber for the State of the Union. And under his leadership, House Democrats have lowered costs, we've created great paying union jobs, and we have made communities safer. We've spurred a period of renewed opportunity. 10.7 million new jobs, the lowest unemployment rate in half a century, and wage growth that is outpacing inflation. But that work has seemed to have ground to a halt. Here's what we've seen from the majority over the last month. The first bill of the 118th Congress was a bill that helps billionaires dodge their taxes and added $114 billion to the deficit. They continued their assault on reproductive freedom and are threatening economic disaster in order to cut Social Security and Medicare, and filling our schedule with hollow, symbolic stunts. The American people are in the GOP's rearview mirror. It's politics over people, plain and simple. And our constituents and the American people are seeing this. A recent national poll found that 73% of Americans say House Republicans haven't paid enough attention to the country's most important problems. The American people don't see themselves in the Republican agenda. And I would ask the majority leader, what does he say to them? I am hearing the exact same rhetoric, the exact same political posturing that I've heard for the last month. It doesn't give the American people any reason to think the GOP's priorities are going to focus on them. Let's just look at what we were able to do as Democrats without a single Republican vote in the Inflation Reduction Act. True cost savings that went and started to go into effect this past month. We delivered a historic victory for seniors. We capped out-of-pocket drug costs at $2,000 a year. We limited insulin copays to $35 a month. We empowered Medicare to negotiate drug prices, and we punished drug companies for predatory price hikes. Once again, every single Republican in the House voted against lowering seniors' pharmacy bills, lowering these costs for our Americans. A Republican member even asked, how are we going to undo that when we get into the majority? And here we are. The House Republicans' campaign platform took direct aim at this historic legislation. So we can vote on sham bills. We can look at what the DC City Council is doing. That is up to the majority to set that agenda. Our agenda is going to remain on lowering costs for Americans, that the issues they talk around their kitchen tables and worry about are the issues we are going to remain focused on. And I would ask the majority leader, will you commit to defending these cost savings, these true victories for our seniors? I have to say I'm disappointed that it seemed like a simple question. Would you support the cap on insulin at $35 a month when 1 in 4 Americans with diabetes didn't take their medication because they simply couldn't afford them? But if the gentleman wants to talk about Social Security, I welcome that discussion. It is clear that Speaker McCarthy, who was just at the White House yesterday, was talking with the president, who underlined the urgency of responsibly raising the debt ceiling, something that Republicans did 3 times under President Trump. But instead, the majority seems more than ready to hold our economy hostage, to risk a global recession, to risk the full faith and credit of the United States, to gut those very programs, Social Security, Medicare, and to put more money in the pockets of the rich. They are using this debt ceiling as a smokescreen. So let's get the facts straight. This is not about new spending. This is about money we already owe. And if we want to go back to a place where Donald Trump really excelled, it was in driving up the deficit. $8 trillion in 4 years under the Trump administration. That is a quarter of our entire debt ceiling. And again, when Donald Trump was in office, spiking our debt ceiling, the debt ceiling was raised 3 times without fanfare. Who benefits from that borrowing? The rich, the very rich, and the ultra rich. Who do you think, if we don't pay this debt ceiling, is going to take over those payments? Apparently, you think it should be our seniors on Medicare and Social Security, families who are looking for affordable housing, our veterans, our children, our planet. You don't have to take it from me. The majority has made their position perfectly clear. One Republican member said the debt ceiling is an obvious leverage point. Another said the focus of budget cuts has got to be on entitlements. The Republicans' Budget Committee chair has called for eligibility reforms to Social Security and Medicare. The Republican Study Committee has openly proposed raising the retirement age to 70, handing Social Security accounts over to Wall Street, transitioning Medicare to a voucher system. All the while, when they actually are taking action, we're back to the rich, the very rich, and the super rich. First bill passed, adding to the deficit so that billionaires and the very wealthy can avoid paying the taxes that we ask our teachers, our firefighters, our nurses to pay. And what's more, what's waiting on the agenda is a proposal to do away with the IRS. Let's do away with income tax and go to a system of a 30% sales tax. This would be devastating to families at home who are trying to put food on their table, a roof over their families, and have a basic quality of life. So I ask the majority leader, do you agree with your colleagues, or will you join Democrats and keep our seniors and everyday Americans off the chopping block? I thank the majority leader, but I have to disagree. I think the majority is well aware that there is a big difference between our responsibilities around the debt ceiling and spending discussions, and what we have seen be brought together by all the quotes from Republicans laying out that this is their leverage point to cut spending for the basics for the American people. Those are your words, not the words of Democrats or President Biden. And I would completely disagree with this idea that maintaining our full faith and credit for things that we have already agreed on, that is not a blank check. That is not something that benefits President Biden. That is basic fiscal responsibility. And what we have here is a case of hostage taking. The willingness to risk global economic destruction, to put the full faith and credit of the United States in jeopardy, to be able to reduce investments we've made in the American people? What is it you would like to reduce? There is nothing we hear. And when we point out the majority's own words that it is entitlements we're coming after, now we're saying, well, that's not our goal. But let's look at what happened under our last Republican administration. Donald Trump tacked nearly $8 trillion onto our deficit. If that had not occurred, we would not even be at our debt ceiling right now. That would be coming in several years. And $8 trillion on that deficit is a quarter of everything we owe. And when that was occurring, when the spending was going to the very wealthiest of Americans, when my colleagues were last in the majority and Donald Trump would sign their bills, there was no mention of the debt ceiling. But now that we need to protect our seniors, those who are hungry in our communities, those who are still struggling to find health insurance, those who are needing to access security in their communities, to find affordable housing, the investments that we're making in fighting climate change, building resiliency, and protecting our planet, when those things that don't affect the very wealthy and privileged, those are the things we're willing to put on the chopping block and use the full faith and credit of the United States as leverage, that is a disservice to the American people and is the reason we are seeing polls like I previously cited. The American people see they are not a part of the Republican agenda. This is about stunts, and it is about building the economy that works only for the very wealthy in this country. I would ask that the Republican majority leader look beyond the constituencies of the very wealthy. And I hope that you will find in your agenda in the coming weeks room for our seniors, room for our families, room for joining us in putting people over politics, making sure that we are working, continuing the work that we started in rebuilding our infrastructure, making an investment in jobs. We've created over 1 million jobs in the infrastructure bill every single year for the next 10 years. Those projects are going to be rolling out across this country. We've seen it already with the president's trip to Cincinnati to make sure that we are not only rebuilding our roads and bridges and investing in the American people, but expanding broadband, creating great paying jobs, creating opportunity to help the American people. Sham bills, using our full faith and credit, using the debt ceiling to continue to rig the system for the very wealthiest Americans, that's not what we're about. And I hope that we are going to begin to see an agenda from the GOP that has a glimmer of the American family reflected in it. Let's go over the basic facts here just briefly once again. What the House GOP did fight for in 2017 was a $2 trillion in tax giveaways for our largest corporations and for the wealthy, because that's who they work for. The rich, the very rich, and the super rich. And under the Trump administration, we had record job loss of 3 million jobs. So I am prepared to close if you are, but I would like to close if the gentleman yields for that.
Happy to yield for that.
I thank him for joining me today. I look forward to many more conversations to come. In the meantime, our caucus is thrilled to welcome the president back to this chamber on Tuesday for a State of the Union address. And we hope the majority will draw some inspiration and work with us in service of the people who sent us here. Let's put people over politics, put them back on the table here in Congress.